Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the making of the movie Zulu, which was a big British movie classic from the early 1960s. I think they started making it in early 1963, and I think it was released in 1964, and did quite well at the box office and was considered in its time and in that era, one of the great defining movies that say, in the same status in terms of, say, the Godfather movie would be, more than a decade later and so on. So, but Zulu's come under it's nearly the 60th anniversary, I think, of the movie. It's coming up now. It's come under, I guess, a re-scrutiny, in as much as as I understand it, the British security services, who are now simply, there to enforce and implement the globalist ideological agenda on the population, the unwilling population. And, part of that is to detach the population from all of their history, anything that may create stirrings of pride in nation and society and so on. Zulu is one of those movies, brave British soldiers, all that sort of stuff. So that that has to be got rid of, for goodness sakes. That can't be tolerated. And instead, we have to have remakes of Great Expectations, the Charles Dickens classic of the 1840s or something, and that has to be 50% of the cast now have to be black and lesbian and all this sort of stuff. So it just goes to show you they're attacking it from two sides, destroying the history and anything that may ignite patriotic feelings, and then using just rewriting history, in effect, to present the world in the globalist image of today. But coming back to Zulu, now Zulu is an interesting movie. I mean, no one can deny it's certainly a tour de force. You can see the Hollywood touches in the movie that you wouldn't see if it was just a purely British-made movie, and that's worth commenting on in a few directions. They had to suspend historical accuracy in order to gin it up with tension and confrontation. So let me talk a little bit about that. Now, the movie was actually made, primarily at least, made by Jewish producers and directors, and with primarily, not exclusively, primarily funded by Jewish controlled financiers, and that was it for a British movie. That was interesting. Now, what had happened in the McCarthy era is a lot of the Jewish, particularly the Jewish, because they were always the most prone to be approached by or be associated with the Soviet communists. That was on the Soviet communist list. Like, if you wanted to target somebody to turn them as an agent, someone in the West, or to subvert them somehow, you'd always the big three things that the undercover agents were supposed to look for was black or Jewish, gay or lesbian, and somehow related to academia, or in the case of black people, trade unions. So those were the people that they went after. When the McCarthy era was on, a lot of those people had to kind of leave the United States. Many of them went to Britain, and they were employed by the BBC, which later on became itself an absolute, an absolute hive of Marxist ideology, and indeed as it is today. So that was an interesting sort of series of events, and then the knock-on effects of those events. But that meant some of the movies in Britain were being infused with Jewish ideas of social justice and Hollywood attitudes and so on. So and Zulu was one of those movies. Now, there's a few things in the movie that were not historically accurate. It's depicted that the Gonville Bromhead character, that's played by Michael Caine, who was a lieutenant, was supposed to be the commanding officer in that Rorke's Drift. It was a mission station, but it's also like a supply depot for the army in that area. So they had like a lot of supplies of food and ammunition and so on. So it was depicted in the movie that the aristocratic officer Bromhead was in charge. That was never the case. The senior officer was John Chard, the engineering officer, and he was the senior officer, and he was in charge. So they try and make out in the movie that it was the aristocrat was in charge, but the working class officer of engineers just showed how useless the aristocrat was, and there were comments in there, got a commission before he could shave and this sort of thing. Now, the British military establishment, the idea was that you could buy a commission. So if your family was well off enough, you could actually buy a commission and put your sons into the army or the military as officers. The Navy required a certain degree of competence. You had to pass tests and show that you knew about how to navigate and all that sort of stuff. The Army was a little bit different. As long as you could afford to enter the Army, then you could buy a commission. Part of the reason was that they had pretty fancy uniforms, and you needed to own a horse. You need to be able to pay for things like swords and various other trappings of military prestige, and so only well-to-do people could afford it. Now, by the 1870s, that was changing, and there were a lot more officers there who actually had worked their way up through the ranks and had shown and demonstrated competence on the way through. So they were depicting a Britain of 30, 40, 50 years earlier in that. So that wasn't accurate. The idea that Gonville Bromhead, the supposed aristocrat, Bromhead actually had served in, he was experienced in warfare, but he'd served with cannon batteries. So, and he was effectively deaf. And he couldn't be given command of anything because he was deaf. And even though he had a reasonably well-connected family and he was a very brave man and all that sort of stuff, he nonetheless couldn't hold a command. But that isn't mentioned in the movie, but that was the fact. And that this tension between him, the aristocrat, and Chard, the working class guy, the engineer, that wasn't true. Chard was quite a sophisticated guy. He was a confidant of Queen Victoria, or later on, not necessarily at the time. So he was considered to be far from uncouth. He was considered to be quite a refined dude, even back in the day. So Bromhead, because of his deafness, spoke quite strangely, and so. Again, he wasn't in command. Now, the Bromhead character is supposed to be made, or makes comments along the lines of, the cowardly blacks and the blacks are just cowards and this sort of thing, which he wouldn't have said. The British were acutely aware of the very militaristic nature of the Zulus and of their capacities and their ability to fight fight and prosecute wars. So the likelihood of Bromhead saying something like that, particularly given his deafness, was about nil. So the depiction of the British or the officers as racists and of white supremacy and that sort of thing, which you can see themes of that in Zulu, not prominent, but they're there. And they were inserted by, the Jewish script writers and insisted on by Cy Anfeld and those people that were involved with the making of the movie. The Bromhead was the garrison at Rorke's Drift. This is the station the Zulus assaulted. There was about 100 or so of them. and little over 100, I think it was, regular soldiers, and then some other sort of hangers-on like surgeons and cooks, that sort of thing. So when 4,500 Zulu warriors came at them, they really had it was brave. I mean, I'm not sort of minimizing their bravery and courage, but the reality was they either fought or they died. And if you're going to die anyway, you might as well die fighting type attitude. So it wasn't if they had other options. They could have run away, or they could have escaped somewhere, or they could have waved the white flag, and the Zulus would have said, "Hey, no problem, guys." That wasn't the situation. The Zulus were there to kill them, and so they had no option but to fight. Not that it wasn't brave in its way, but they didn't have another option. So it was something that it's the sort of bravery again that comes from you got nowhere else to go type bravery. Now, Bromhead in particular was demonstrated his bravery multiple times. If the Zulus broke through the outer perimeter of the, they had all these big supply box, biscuit box, big wooden crates set up, so and sandbags as part of a defensive perimeter. So if the Zulus did happen to break through, then there was a small detachment of men that were just had bayonets. I mean, they had rifles in there, but they had bayonets. So they would do bayonet charges at the Zulus that had broken through. I think there were 10 or 12 of them or so. And Bromhead was often leading those bayonet charges. Now, these Zulu dudes are fit dudes with their spears, and the way of Zulu fighting is you had to come in close, and they would stab you with this short stabbing spear. That was how they were trained to do business. So bayonet charging them, you'd have to have pretty big kahunas to go and do that. But again, there wasn't much of a choice. If you didn't do that, you'd have all been killed. So they kind of had to do that, and that's a different sort of bravery. So the movie created racial tension and class tension. It really overexploited the class tension, I thought, and untruthfully, it wasn't what happened at all. They had to invent that. They also had to invent the racial tension. I don't believe that would have been there. The people in there were acutely aware of just how dangerous the Zulus were. Now, to give you an idea, I think it only went for a day and a half. I think the battle, but the Zulus. I think it was 600 dead, and approximately 1,000 subsequently died or were maimed as a consequence of their wounds incurred in the battle. So that's like a third of the Zulus, suffered, and I think 20 odd or so of the 150 approx defenders. Again, that 150 including cooks and so on. Those surgeons and the like. There was a relatively small number of deaths amongst the garrison there, but to give you just an illustration, they've got single shot rifles, by the way, and there's only 100 plus of them have got rifles. That day and a half they expended just over 20,000 bullets. Now, so if you look at that's hundreds of bullets per man with a rifle. That's the amount of bullets that were shot. Now, given that the Zulus were like to sort of rush, charge en masse to these defenders around the perimeter of this mission station and supply depot, there's only less than 10%, 7% or something of the bullets that were fired actually hit something. That gives you just an appreciation of how many bullets had to be expended. Now, if they hadn't been in a supply depot and had that many bullets that were quite effectively distributed amongst the soldiers, by the way, so they could keep up the rate of fire. If they hadn't been in a supply depot, they probably wouldn't have had that much ammunition. So that was also a critical factor in being able to repel the Zulus. But coming back to the movie, at the end of the movie, the Zulus allegedly were left as a respect of the bravery and determination of the defenders, the British military defenders of that Rorke's Drift station. That's one sort of comment that was taken up, I guess, by the British chroniclers of the time. But in the distance, there was a large cloud of dust appearing, and that was the main column of the British main force. Lord Chelmsford, the main army group, if you will, and they're not far away now. The Zulus will be acutely aware that if the cavalry start to come out ahead of that, and then the Zulus could very easily find themselves in a lot of trouble, and so they decided. Since the other argument or other story or version of the story that goes around, the Zulus rather wisely decided that it was maybe time to go, particularly given the amount of casualties they'd taken, that they weren't really getting anywhere, and that the other British column is not that far away. Now the supply of ammunition and these sorts of things, that the garrison could have kept on going, although at this stage they were quite thirsty and they were fatigued and so on. So it is possible that the Zulus might have overwhelmed if they just kept on going, but they could have suffered another 1,000, 1,500 casualties in doing so. So if you're throwing away 3,000 fit, able-bodied, well-trained warriors to kill 100 British soldiers, I mean that's hardly a worthwhile victory there, and I'm sure that thought would have crossed the mind of the Zulu commander on the spot. But on coming back to the movie, when I look at it now, I see those themes of pushing class tension and racial tension, white supremacy. I see that now. As a kid, I kind of didn't see it. I mean, the movie came out, I think, about the year I was born or something. But it was when I look at the way they push those themes as a kid, when I first saw the movie, which was, I don't know, 1970 or something. I looked at that. I didn't see it. It didn't stick out to me at the time. I see it now because I understand the ideology behind it. Did any of that sink into my mind? Did I, as a kid, come away thinking, "Wow, those Zulus are really brave"? I don't think I formed any opinions along those lines. Certainly not as a kid or even as a young man. It was just the entertainment of it. Did I see it in any sort of patriotic sense of, white guy beats up on the black guys or something, or demonstrates superiority? No, I don't recall thinking that either. I just saw it as a movie. But there you go. Now, the Zulu today, as I mentioned earlier, that movie, that's on the list by the neo KGB of the globalist controlled security apparatus and justice apparatus, or so-called justice apparatus in the Western world, that anything that connects white people today with their proud, high-achieving past must be severed and must be destroyed. And Zulu's one of those conduits to a proud past that has to be got rid of. Being with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.